I treated a wounded stranger. Then she whispered, "Human, I'm your queen." The scanner on my crawler screamed before I even saw the smoke. I was already having a rough evening. My haul from the eastern debris belt had been 3 cracked coolant pipes and a nav panel so fried it sparked when I touched it. The sandstorm that had been threatening all afternoon finally decided to show up just as I turned for home, and my front left wheel bearing was making a sound I did not like at all. So when the proximity alert went off, 2 clicks east, I almost ignored it. Almost. My name is Cal Merritt. I have been running salvage on Vardex Rest for 6 years. Before that, I spent 8 years as a combat medic with the Colonial Ground Forces, pulling people out of situations they had no business surviving. The planet I live on is a dust-covered rock that nobody important wanted, which is exactly why humans settled it. We have a talent for making homes out of places the rest of the galaxy leaves behind. I turned the crawler east. The smoke was thin and dark, rising fast in the wind. I nearly missed the pod entirely because it had come down in the shadow of a red rock shelf and half buried itself on impact. The hull was Varithian. I could tell from the curve of the plating and the engraved border patterns running along the seams. Not military, the markings were too decorative, too precise, personal craft, and expensive in a way that made military hardware look cheap. I killed the engine and sat for 2 seconds doing what my old field sergeant called a threat scan, which basically meant looking and listening hard before doing anything. No movement, no sounds except wind. The pod had hit the ground at a bad angle, not a navigation failure. The entry vector was all wrong. Something had hit this ship from above and knocked this pod loose while it was still in high orbit. Someone had shot this thing down. I grabbed my field kit and went in anyway. The hatch was warped in the frame but not sealed. I got a pry bar under the edge and leaned into it, and it gave, with a sound like a gunshot. The inside of the pod was dim, lit only by one failing emergency strip along the ceiling. The air smelled like ozone, and something organic I could not immediately name. She was in the back corner, half collapsed against the rear wall, held partly upright by the safety harness that had kept her from being killed on impact. Tall, silver-gray skin, the jaw crest that marked Varethian high caste. Her robes had been something extraordinary once. Now they were torn open across her torso, and what I saw underneath made me move fast. 3 lacerations, deep, the kind that came from shrapnel when a hull ruptured near you. The middle one was the bad one. She was breathing, but it was the shallow, careful breathing of someone whose body was trying very hard not to make the pain worse. Her eyes were closed. I pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck, the way I had been trained for Varithian physiology in a 2-hour refresher course 3 years ago that I had paid almost 0 attention to. The pulse was there, weak and too fast, but there. I opened my kit on the floor and started working. Varithian biology is not human biology. Their blood runs darker, almost violet, and their clotting response works differently. You cannot use standard human coagulants at full concentration, or you create a worse problem than the one you started with. I had patched up a Varithian dock worker once, 4 years back, after a loading cable snapped and took a piece of the deck with it. I had not thought about that afternoon in years. Now I pulled every detail I could remember up from wherever memories hide, and I held onto them hard. Half concentration on the coagulant foam, pressure dressing on the middle wound first. That was the one that would kill her if I let it keep going. The other 2 were serious but not immediately fatal. I recalibrated my pain block injector by halving the standard dose because Varethian nervous systems process analgesics differently, and a human dose would drop her blood pressure to a level I did not want to deal with. The hull patching foam in my kit was not medical equipment. It was literally for sealing cracks in metal. But it was sterile, it was flexible when dry, and it had saved 2 lives in the field before this one, when I had nothing better. I used it as a secondary seal over the pressure dressing, and held pressure with my hands for 7 minutes by the clock on my wrist, crouched in a wrecked pod in a sandstorm, counting seconds. She stirred twice. The second time her eyes opened partway and she looked at me, and I said, without looking up from what I was doing, "Do not talk yet, breathe slow, I have got you." She made a sound, not words, something between acknowledgement and pain. "I know," I said. "I know, almost there." 40 minutes after I opened that hatch, her breathing had evened out, and her pulse had come up to something I could live with. My hands were shaking slightly from the drop in adrenaline, which always happens after the crisis ends, and your body remembers it was scared. I sat back against the opposite wall of the pod and let myself be tired for exactly 90 seconds. Then I covered her with my jacket, keyed my comm, and called the colony. "Petra," I said, when my neighbor picked up. Petra Wynn ran the colony's small medical bay and had seen enough strange things in her career that she did not ask unnecessary questions. "I need a warm room, a bioscan unit, and someone who can keep their mouth shut. I found a wounded Verithian. High caste. Do not contact any official channels until I talk to you." A pause. "How bad?" "Stable now, but she needs real care, not field work." "Bring her in the back way. Give me 20 minutes." I loaded her into the crawler, as carefully as I could manage alone, which was not graceful, but got the job done. She was conscious enough to grip my arm when I moved her, which I took as a good sign even though it hurt. The drive back took 30 minutes in the storm. She did not speak. I did not push it. Petra met us at the rear door of the med bay, and between the two of us, we got her inside and onto a proper cot. While Petra ran the bioscan and started setting up an actual treatment line, I stood in the corner and washed blood off my hands in the small sink and stared at the wall for a moment. "Cal," Petra said quietly, from across the room. Her voice had a particular quality I had heard from her exactly once before, when a colonial survey ship had come down 3 years ago and a government official had walked out of the wreckage. That careful, contained quality that meant something had just become much more complicated. I turned around. Petra was holding the bioscan results, and her face was very still. She pointed at the screen without speaking. I walked over and looked at the scan, then at the small data panel beside it, that the scanner had automatically pulled up when it ran the subject's biological signature against the Galactic Registry. There was a name, there was a title, there was a photograph. I looked at the photograph. I looked at the woman on the cot. I looked at the photograph again. I put the scanner down on the table very gently. "Petra," I said. "Yes," she said. "Go home, lock your door. Do not talk to anyone tonight." She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded, gathered her coat from the hook on the wall, and left without another word. That is the thing about people who have lived through difficult situations. They know when not to ask questions. I pulled a chair up beside the cot and sat down and waited. She woke up 2 hours later. The storm had passed outside, and the colony was quiet. The med bay had only the low hum of the equipment and the occasional sound of wind finding gaps in the old building walls. Her eyes opened and she looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes were deep amber, with pupils that contracted vertically, and there was an intelligence in them that was fully present, even after everything her body had been through. She was assessing the room, the equipment, me, taking inventory, the way people do when they wake in an unknown place and need to know immediately whether they are in danger. "You are safe," I said. "You are in a medical bay, in a human colony, on Vardek's Rest. I found you in your pod about 2 hours ago. You had 3 lacerations, the worst one along your left side. You are stable. Your people have not been contacted yet." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in standard galactic common, with an accent like deep water moving over stone, "Why not?" "Because whoever shot you down might be monitoring official channels. I did not know if calling it in would help you, or put a target on this building." Another pause. The kind that meant she was thinking seriously. That was a correct assessment. "I have my moments," I said. She looked at me with that same unreadable expression for a long time. Then she said, "You did not ask who I was before you helped me." I shrugged. "You were dying. Seemed like the wrong time to make introductions." Something shifted in her face, not quite an expression, more like a very controlled response to something that surprised her. "What is your name?" she asked. "Cal Merritt, salvager, former field medic. Current resident of a planet nobody important has ever heard of." I leaned back in the chair. "I already know yours. The bioscan pulled your registry entry. I want you to know that before we go any further, because I do not like surprises, and I would guess you do not either." She studied me. "And yet, you are still sitting in that chair, as though nothing has changed. Something has changed, I said. Now I understand why someone shot you down. That is useful information. It does not change what I did 2 hours ago, but it changes what needs to happen next. She closed her eyes for a moment, slowly. It was a deliberate gesture, formal in a way I could not fully read. Then she opened them again, and spoke quietly and clearly, and with the full weight of someone who was not in the habit of saying things they did not mean. Human, I am your queen. I had known it was coming from the moment I read the scanner data. I had spent 2 hours preparing for this moment, and it still landed like something heavy dropped from a considerable height. Queen Sovereign Saravi Velverith, I said, of the 7th line. Sovereign of the Varithian connectivity. Ruler of 14 systems and approximately 60 billion people, give or take. Give or take, she said, with something in her voice I had not expected. It was dry, almost wry, as though she had surprised herself by finding the response slightly funny. I need to ask you something, I said, and I need you to answer me straight, because the next few hours depend on it. Ask. The coup attempt, how far has it gone? Are we talking 3 unhappy admirals with a plan, or is half your navy already in motion? The shift in her expression was subtle but real. She had not expected the question to be that specific. How do you know it was a coup? Because you came down in an escape pod from a personal vessel on a route between your capital and the Meridian Treaty Summit. Your escort ships are not here. Your ship is not here. You are here, alone, in a pod that should only be used if the main ship was destroyed, and you are wearing something that cost more than my crawler, but has no armoring on it, which means you were not expecting trouble when you left home. I folded my hands. So, the attack came from people who knew your route, which means people on the inside, and they moved when you were between points of safety, which means they planned it carefully. That is not a border skirmish. That is a coup. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, quietly and without theater, 3 high admirals of the connectivity fleet. They have been planning it for over a year. They believe I am dead. The pod's transponder was destroyed in the initial strike. Good, I said. That gives us time. And it means they are not looking for you here. Not yet. I stood up. I need to get you a secure communications line to whoever you trust inside your loyalty guard. I am guessing standard galactic relay channels are not safe. They will not be. The admirals have enough allies to monitor primary relay networks. Right, I said. Then we do not use primary relay networks. I went to the back room of the med bay, where I kept a secondary kit of equipment that had nothing to do with medicine. Humans on the fringe worlds had been running what the official channels called pirate band communications for about 30 years, because the official networks charged fees we could not afford and asked questions we did not want to answer. The relay system we had built was not elegant. It bounced signals through a chain of small stations spread across 4 different fringe planets, each one run by someone who had a good reason not to talk to authorities. It was completely invisible to anyone who did not already know it existed. I brought the relay unit into the main room and set it up on the table beside her cot. This is going to look like nothing you have ever seen, I said. That is the point. Give me the contact signature for your loyalty guard commander, and I will bounce it through a route that does not exist on any official map. She watched me work with an expression that was no longer difficult to read. It was focused and intent, and calibrated in a way that told me she was extremely good at evaluating people quickly, and that whatever she was seeing when she looked at me, she had decided she could work with it. She gave me the contact signature from memory. I keyed it in, set the bounce route, and started the handshake sequence. It took 11 minutes to establish, which is an eternity when you are waiting, and feels even longer when the person beside you is the most politically significant individual in 7 star systems. The signal connected. She spoke in Varithian for about 4 minutes, rapid and precise, using what I assumed were codes and verification phrases. At one point she paused and glanced at me, and whoever she was speaking to must have asked about me, because she said something brief, and then said my name. Then she went back to rapid Varithian, and I stayed quiet and watched the door. When she finished, she looked at me with something new in her face, not quite relief, something more complicated than relief, the expression of someone who has been in serious danger and has just seen the danger begin to recede, but who is aware enough to know it is not over yet. My guard commander has a ship, she said, dark running, a route the admirals do not know, 6 hours. Good, I said. You should sleep if you can. You lost a significant amount of blood and your body needs time. Cal Merritt, she said. The way she said my name was different from the way anyone had said it before. Deliberate, like she was placing it somewhere specific in her memory. In all the years I have held this position, no one has ever helped me before knowing who I was. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, that is not about humans. That is just about being decent. The fact that nobody managed it before tonight is not your fault. It is the galaxy's problem. She looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then she said something in Verithian, very quietly. I do not speak Verithian, and I did not ask her to translate. Some things are not meant for translation. She slept for 4 hours. I sat outside the door and drank terrible coffee and watched the colony's single unpaved main street stay empty in the post-storm quiet. At one point, Petra texted me from across the colony to ask if I needed anything. I told her I was fine. She sent back a single word, which was good, and I appreciated that she did not push further. The ship arrived just before dawn. It came down 2 kilometers outside the colony, with its running lights off, which on another night might have startled someone. On this night I was watching for it. I helped her walk out to the waiting transport, and she moved carefully, but under her own strength, which was more than I had expected 6 hours ago. At the entrance to the transport she stopped and turned to look at me. The sun was just beginning to touch the edge of the rock formations to the east, and the light caught the silver in her skin, and she looked entirely like what she was, the sovereign of 60 billion people, standing in the dust of a planet nobody important had ever heard of, in borrowed clothes, with my field foam patches still holding the worst of her wounds closed. When this is over, she said, when the admirals have answered for what they did, I will remember this world. You do not need to do anything, I said. I know, she said. That is precisely why I will. She paused. Then, you will find, Cal Merritt, that being remembered by me is not a small thing. The transport lifted off without a sound, and was gone before the sun fully cleared the horizon. I walked back to my workshop, put the kettle on, sat down in the chair beside my workbench, and looked at the space where she had been lying 6 hours ago, and at the relay unit still warm on the table, and at my jacket folded on the corner of the cot. I have pulled a lot of things out of wreckage in my life, machinery, cargo, metal that other people decided was not worth the trouble. That is the job. You learn to look at broken things and find what is still usable. But I had not been thinking about usable last night. I had not been thinking about any of it in those terms at all. I had just seen someone who needed help, and I had helped her. The coffee kettle began to whistle. I got up and poured myself a cup and thought about 6 years on a dust planet that nobody important had ever heard of, and about how sometimes the nobody important places are exactly where the most important things happen. Outside, the sun was fully up now, and Vardek's Rest looked the same as it always did, dry and red and unremarkable, stretching out in every direction to the horizon. I drank my coffee. I had a wheel bearing to fix. The galaxy could sort itself out for a few hours.